Welcome to There's Sometimes a Buggy, Irresponsible Opinions About Classic Film. I'm Elise.
I'm Dave, and this week we return to the Acteurist Oeuvre-view. This is episode 17 in our series on Lilli Palmer. We've got Sade and The House That Screamed for you today. After that discussion is concluded, stay tuned for Fear and Moviegoing in Toronto. We went to see our first post-COVID film at the Carlton Cinema, which is, after all, our neighborhood cinema.
Now, yeah.
Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Let's get into Lilli Palmer. These ones, we already mentioned in past episodes, we were approaching these with trepidation, so let's see how we came out watching them. Sade is first, and we'll give Leonard Maltin the first crack at evaluating it. He gives this one 2 stars out of a possible 4.
That's generous.
Fictionalized biography of world's most celebrated sexual and physical pervert.
What? Sexual and physical? How are these separate categories?
If you're expecting something raunchy, forget it. Pretty tepid stuff. So Maltin doesn't even give it 2 boners up.
Nope, 1 boner down.
The director, Endfield, our first shocking factoid. And then the cast, Keir Dullea, Senta Berger, Lilli Palmer, Anna Massey, and John Huston. So you can't fault them for the cast anyway. You got some real interesting personalities in this film.
Okay, we weren't really looking forward to this episode.
No.
It's late 60s films, late 60s international cinema, specifically European, that is horror, sexual in tone. Like, none of that seems very promising from our perspective.
These are the debased children of Peeping Tom, I would say.
I was expecting something, like, of these 2 movies, I was expecting something that would make us more uncomfortable, though, instead of which they were just really silly. So Sade is a movie of ideas, like Hard Contract, but it is not good enough to come up to its ideas, right?
There were really good people involved in this, too. The screenplay was by Richard Matheson.
Well, okay, hold on. Richard Matheson, we like him from Somewhere in Time.
And
I don't know.
Twilight Zone.
Which Twilight Zones did he do?
Many.
Sure, but which?
He wrote the Shatner ones, I think both of them.
Somewhere in Time, he wrote the novel it was based on, but he also did write the screenplay, and you've got to attribute that one to him because the director was French. So,
Jeannot Sport, who also directed Supergirl.
So probably did not have a lot to do with the English screenplay. And yeah, and also Supergirl is widely considered a terrible movie. So I don't know how those 2 personalities came together to make one perfect movie with Somewhere in Time, but they did. But I have read a Matheson novel, Hell House, and it was so terrible. It was unimaginably terrible. And it also was kind of about tepid sadism, but with tepid eroticism. The writing was just beyond belief terrible.
Didn't he write I Am Legend, the vampire thing?
I've never read that one. That one's considered a sci-fi horror classic, but...
Yeah, it doesn't interest me, really.
I like haunted house stories, so one time when I got very sick with the flu, you may remember, Dave, I read Hell House, and it was dreadful.
Yeah, I remember you made some remarks at that time.
And this is dreadful. It's dreadful. The ideas are interesting, so hopefully we'll have something to talk about, but the screenplay is dreadful, and the direction is silly. From the Wikipedia page, let's hear from some of the contemporary reviewers. Oh, first though, let's play the game. Which one of these movies do you think was a hit, and which was a tremendous flop?
Well, I'd have to think House That Screamed was a hit.
Yes. What would make you think that, though? It's terrible.
I found it kind of interesting. Not so
What?
this one. At least, listeners, you can look forward to maybe a more spirited discussion in our second half.
Well, I found this one kind of interesting.
Okay.
The other one, not at all. So, Vincent Canby says that the film is not quite as silly as it looks and sounds, but it comes very close. Variety called it a dramatically compelling, creative, and artful film. Whoa. But warned true sadomasochists will be disappointed. Because the orgy scenes are silly, not obscene or erotic. And there is nothing shown or even suggested that it's terrible enough to jail a man for life. Yeah, if you just even glance through the Marquis de Sade's Wikipedia page, some of the episodes of attacking women for which he was jailed are way more demented than anything. You can get into arguments about when people should be jailed for life, but are way more demented than anything portrayed in this movie.
Yeah, well, a lot of the most violent stuff is done to inanimate objects that happen to be in the room. Like, running a sword through a suit of armor and stuff like that. That's supposed to represent, I guess, some of the more actually vicious things that were happening at these orgies, but it doesn't get filmed.
I don't know.
Which is fine. I didn't particularly want to see real sadism.
I'll give you one more. Gene Siskel said, titillation is the name of this celluloid garbage, but even members of the bit and bridle set will be turned off by Keir Dullea, ripping open pillows and pouring wine over harlots. So even the most mundane, middle-of-the-road critics are accurately perceiving the silliness of the scenes in this movie. Anything having to do with sex in this movie is so unbelievably silly. And it's not just our perspective now on what they were doing in 60s cinema. It was the perspective then. I couldn't make my way through the entire Wikipedia entry on the Marquis de Sade to research this, but just to get some idea of how biographically accurate it was, I did read an article called At Home with the Marquis de Sade from The New Yorker from 1998 by Francine Duplessis-Gray. This article is great. For the faithful listeners who have bothered to watch these movies for this podcast episode, read this article because it is so much better than the de Sade film. If someone were to make a film from a screenplay based on this article, I'd watch the shit out of it. One of the things the movie does in order to create, I guess, what they thought was a marketable screenplay, one of the banalizations it performs on the Marquis de Sade's real life is that, at least according to this New Yorker article, his relationship with his wife was loving and devoted and fascinating and interesting. Did not end well, but it was psychologically fascinating, and there was some kind of love and some kind of sexual relationship between him and his wife. He did have an affair with her beautiful younger sister. She was homely and charmless, and she had a beautiful younger sister, and he did have an affair with her, but it was a brief affair.
She wasn't the great love of his life?
By no means.
Okay.
If anybody was, it might have been his wife.
It's revealed that the movie is all taking place in retrospect as he expires in his asylum cell. He's wandering through his past experiences, and the culmination of all of this ransacking of his memory is the regret that he feels over having brought his wife into this life of sadism and debauchery.
Yeah, well, I don't think the real Marquis de Sade felt anything like that.
The movie does end on a note of emphasizing his love for her and his feelings about how their relationship affected her.
Sure, but they're not portrayed as having a sex life, let alone any kind of mutual, interesting relationship.
No, there's some ellipses there that really had to be filled in if they wanted that ending to have the kind of impact that it should have. And you've got Anna Massey, who I really like.
She has barely any speaking lines in this film, but nevertheless manages to bring some kind of well-rounded characterization to her moments.
We just saw her in Peeping Tom, and here she is again.
Their relationship sounds more like the Peeping Tom relationship, except with sex.
Exactly.
So she could have played that part. I'm not sure if Keir Dullea is capable of playing anything. Certainly not this role.
Well, he does play well off of a computer.
It's a very unusual movie. It is intellectually and dramatically ambitious, the screenplay. And the framing of the movie is that Richard Matheson supernatural or sci-fi element that he likes to introduce. And in this case, we've got the number 8, familiar to Twin Peaks The Return fans, the symbol of infinity. He is possibly caught in an end of life, right before the end of life, where some dementia patients have this ultra lucidity with a lot of memory. memories. Some kind of end-of-life review that may go on for infinity, right?
Yeah.
And what the movie is saying repeatedly, and comes back to at the end there, is this Lacanian idea that what de Sade is actually in search of is the real. So that's one through line for the movie. Interesting enough, not interestingly dramatized.
No, it's all in the execution, because it does seem like it could have wound up being an interesting movie, but it just wasn't.
And it spells out all of its ideas in a way that's way too explicit.
I guess this would be very insulting to people who are committed to BDSM as a lifestyle, because it certainly posits that he's doing this because he hasn't been able to consummate proper love. He doesn't really want to do these things.
Well, he's got a bunch of Freudian excuses. One is that John Huston plays his uncle, the Abbé de Sade, who was apparently in real life, did raise him, and was both a priest and a libertine.
Right.
I know no more about it than that. I don't know if any of these episodes presented in the film have any basis in reality of John Huston seducing a servant girl and making her beat young Louis, while some other woman who's in charge of him is getting off on
Yeah, they said who she was, but I forget.
Yeah, I don't know. So yeah, we get the dual Freudian excuses that, we already talked about in terms of Peeping Tom and how these monsters have been produced. The more interesting way to look at de Sade, obviously, is in relation to his times.
No, we don't get any of that.
Well,
There's zero historical context in this film.
I don't know if the orgy at the end, where they're just smashing furniture, is supposed to be some kind of allusion to the revolutionary context.
What I know about de Sade is pretty limited, but he became an efficient administrator under the revolutionary government before winding back up in an asylum. And he apparently took his duties very seriously as an officer of the revolution. And yeah, there's none of that in this film.
Yeah, but also just in terms of why would the Ancien Régime at this particular crisis moment produce this particular kind of psychosis in a way that became culturally interesting, Like this ultra atheist libertine chafing against God and the limitations of the priestly class and whatever have you. I mean, he is like some kind of version of a philosophe.
No, well, he absolutely is, and that's why he was able to transition into the revolutionary period.
It's like a biopic. It's got, instead of any of that, any consideration of what makes him an interesting figure, it is like a really banal, although with an unusual structure, biopic of the Marquis de Sade.
It does have a pretty fun role for Lilli Palmer in spots.
Well, let's talk about the structure of the biopic, because she's very important to that. She's his chief antagonist.
But also, she did save him multiple times from lifetime imprisonment, or finally giving up.
Well, she didn't just give up. She got I don't know what you call it, but like an order from the king, where he was sent directly to prison without trial.
Yeah, sure. But she also got him completely exonerated a few times. There were sealed indictments against him on a couple of occasions. So people weren't even allowed to discuss the fact that he'd been condemned.
Well, the turning point for them in real life, according to this article, and I think the film suggests this too, is when he seduced her younger daughter, who in real life, the beauty, who in real life was her favorite. It made her unmarriageable, and then she died of smallpox. So fun.
You can't really blame her for withdrawing her support from him at that time. Lilli Palmer really gives the film what little value it has, I think, comes from the Lilli Palmer performance.
I think so.
She's really having a good time. The way the movie is structured, again, it's this psychotic old man wandering through the corridors of his memory, hazily representing something close to real events, mixed in with these conversations with the abbé in his mind, who is staging plays that are mockeries of real scenes.
Right, and in some cases there are fantasies and we don't know necessarily which is real and which is fantasy.
Yeah, exactly. And Lilli Palmer really, her best scene is probably that first one.
Right, where the abbé is showing the beginning of this antagonistic relationship that frames the movie between de Sade and his mother-in-law. These marriage negotiations, and also because in this movie, the stupid idea is that the Marquis de Sade, who I'm feeling like in real life, his erotic passions were not aroused by young, beautiful women like they are in this movie. I think he was kind of beyond that. and what he was looking for. Beginning of his crisis, according to the movie, is this marriage where he's cheated into marrying the homely daughter.
Yeah, that sent him on a lifelong path of vicious sadism.
That and the possible childhood abuse that we find out about later.
Yeah, it just activates something that was lying dormant and would have possibly lain dormant forever if he could have just had a beautiful wife. I mean, that is the argument that the movie is making.
So stupid. Okay, and
just let him have this beautiful young woman. I mean, she's singing about her prince coming or whatever, and he sees her and he's like, oh my god, everything's coming up to Sade right now. And then he goes in to sign, and it turns out that he's signed his life away.
And the ink isn't even dry on the contract, and they're telling him, no, that's it. Done deal.
He pulled a switcheroo on you. Like, kudos to Anna Massey for accepting this role and talking about how homely she is. I mean, she's not homely anyway, but...
Well, she's certainly homely by movie standards, but she's got one of those actress faces that she can play whatever.
She's not as beautiful as Senta Berger.
Senta Berger doesn't even have a character in this movie.
No.
She's not even characterized in any way. She seems to be a pure creature of his fantasies. But anyways, we're at the beginning of the movie, and you're referring to the Abbe in his mind's staging of a theatrical version of these marriage negotiations in which everyone is acting like and dressed like a caricature of 18th century aristocracy.
Yeah, they're basically dressed the way guillotiners imagined the aristocracy, and they're behaving in such a silly way, and they're negotiating. But I mean, she is really funny in that scene.
Right, of course, and she can do that kind of broad, very artificial comedy, as we've commented on many times before, and she just keeps bopping people on the face with her fan. But then we move into her actual performance, and the relationship between these two, and how she just, in the film, she just keeps thwarting him. I mean, she does protect him for the sake of her family on several occasions, but mostly she's just his thwarter because she won't let him have the good, beautiful woman. There's hints, like I'm trying to think of how to characterize Lilli Palmer's performance here. She retains some of that tone of artificiality that gives her performance more sort of control and shape than anybody else's has. Like, she's making decisions about how to play the thing, and everybody else except John Huston, who's being John Huston.
Well, John Huston's sort of trying out for Noah Cross in this movie.
Very much is. With the exception of John Huston, no one else is really making decisions about how to play their characters. I feel like they're just floundering. Cy Endfield, by the way, was not the only director on this movie. It's not like some kind of passion project of his.
Well,
it was just something he was assigned to. Roger Corman was originally supposed to direct it and then ended up doing some of the direction. Yeah, it was all over the place. What's interesting about them as antagonists is that she is kind of the only other substantial character in the movie, other than the Abbe, and has the authority to go sword to sword with him, right? Go toe to toe with him.
I guess you could say that, but it's not even that. I mean, she's just dominates him in every scene that they're in together.
Okay, well, yeah, let's go beyond that and talk about how one of the few interesting things about the way the movie is structured is that while he's trying desperately to dominate all of these women, he is being dominated by his mother-in-law.
He's absolutely helpless against her.
What makes her performance interesting is that she could play that in more of a, Glenn Close way.
She's not a battle axe.
That's pretty nasty characterization of Glenn Close. But she's not that steely. Like, she has this authority, but she's also an irony, and she can play with him like a cat with a mouse, but she's also frustrated and vulnerable.
She basically plays these scenes the way she plays certain scenes with Rex Harrison,
Oh yeah, once again. You think this is just another version of the Four Poster, but with a very naughty son-in-law instead?
It's got to have been part of the idea in casting her.
And I do love the way that she can go in and out of artificiality. Like, she knows that this movie is pretty cartoonish. She's giving a stylized performance, but she can suddenly burst out of that into a fully realistic performance. I've commented on that all the way back to, I think the first time I commented on that was the Leslie Howard movie back in the early 40s, The Gentle Sex. And so in their scene, I mean, obviously we were just grasping at straws for anything in this movie being interesting, but in that scene where he's pleading with her to give him another chance, he's going to reform, he's going to be a good married man. The scene where she's crying, she actually manages to bring his performance up to her level, and they do have a good dramatic scene together.
Yeah, that's probably the best scene in the movie. But it's pretty isolated, surrounded by a vast desert of poor execution.
So what else can we say? Well, the real Marquis de Sade, he happened to bequeath the term sadism to us. Masochism got named after some other pervert.
Von Massock.
Yeah, author of Venus and Furs. But he was sadomasochistic. He was
clearly
forcing women to beat him. And we get a little bit of that in this movie, but not so much. He was obsessed with sodomy, and that is one of the reasons he got jailed so often, because it was not legal.
Right.
He was obsessed with sodomizing and being sodomized by both men and women.
Yeah, we don't get any hint of that in this movie.
Well, there's a lot of butts, and butts banging against each other in an utterly ridiculous way. Oh, this is so perverted. Two women's little bare butts are banging against each other.
Bumper cars. Really silly. The screen goes red when he goes into his sex frenzy.
Speaking of Glenn Close, John Malkovich and Glenn Close in the Stephen Frears Dangerous Liaisons, at least as I remember, it's been a long time since I saw it. We are going to do it decades in the future on this podcast, are better at capturing the real psychological abusiveness and perversity of libertinage, corrupting the innocence, the pleasure of corrupting, and the violence of corrupting innocence, and toying with people's emotions.
Yeah, even the teen remake of that, Cruel Intentions, does a much better job of conveying that than this movie does.
If you want to see real horrifying sadism in a movie, don't go to this movie. Go to either one of the studio-era Hollywood Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hydes, the Mamoulian or the Victor Fleming.
Well, the ideas, a lot of it is stuff that I love and stuff that I like to write about, like trying to recapture memories, trying to concretize them and feel certain of their reality when they're so ephemeral. I mean, that's the kind of thing that he's grasping at as his brain expires here. Film just does a very poor job of rendering that quest in an emotionally gripping way.
Well, yeah, because the problem with the screenplay is that it is spelling out its ideas too much. So it's just people saying ideas rather than having conversation. Now, what was so interesting about Hard Contract is that it is also people talking about ideas, but...
Well, there are ideas that couldn't even be quantified, so that's the really fun part about it.
I don't know, I mean, the skill in that screenplay is just amazing in the witty and conversational tone of the way that they are discussing these ideas, right? And the light comedy touch that it calls for and that the actors were able to bring to it, right?
Yeah, there's none of that here.
And I mean, it would be perfectly appropriate to a movie about the 18th century to have that sort of tone, right?
Yeah, it would have been a philosoph film.
And there's the proto-Nietzschean, Sadean ideas, no limits to what can be done except for the imagination. The imagination being the only authority. My imagination versus your imagination. Self versus self in a contest of will to power. But the problem is that none of that actually applies to the dramatic story we're being asked to invest ourselves in, which is the story of a man who, I guess, was abused as a child, who wants to marry a beautiful woman and is being dominated by his mother-in-law. That's the movie's story.
And then he's just acting out until he goes to jail on multiple occasions. Acting out drunkenly and not in a particularly visionary way.
So yeah, if the movie wants to sell us, the movie is so divided against itself on, is this man actually a visionary? Or, as you said, just somebody who's acting out and his ideas are wrong and he's not actually committed to them, and if he had just had the love of a beautiful woman, then he would have been normal.
Yeah, that's what it leaves you with, and that sense of regret that the film is working very hard at the end to convey, that he eventually coaxed his wife over the line into this really stupid pattern of acting out. The screen goes all red and you see Anna Massey involved in the orgies at the end. And we don't get to see any of it from her perspective, so, I mean, it's all about him trying to hold her apart from that, but he couldn't. He brought her into it and now he feels bad.
But what does it mean that he has brought down this entire family? What purpose has this all served? What great purpose has there been for him to have caused this tragedy and destroyed this family? Just some silly romping around and spilling of wine and
Bumper asses.
And occasionally getting upset and beating up women.
Yeah. I mean, there is one scene of actual brutality towards a woman that we see for a sustained period, and the follow-up scene is her negotiating with Lilli Palmer a price to just go away.
But it's hard to know why he's even doing this.
No, exactly.
There's no particular motivation given for it before that scene. He just seems to have these episodes.
Yeah, well, that's how it's conveyed on the screen. That's all you can think. If he's seeing red, he's not in his right mind. He's just doing stupid stuff that he knows Lilli Palmer will be pissed off about. He's not the thinking man's pervert.
And none of those things are integrated with the character for most of the movie that we're supposed to sympathize with.
Yeah, no, I mean, most of the time he seems like a really stodgy, got a vaguely concerned look on his face most of the time. It just doesn't go along with this idea of a wild-eyed libertine. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Could have been interesting, I guess. Really buttoned-down personality who only goes wild in these moments of red-screened madness. But then you can't play it for goofy comedy in those scenes.
I think they really thought that these scenes were wild and erotic. I mean, as much as they could without, for whatever rating they were trying to go to get people to see it.
But if none of the critics saw it that way, then I think we can assume that...
You think Roger Corman was trying to play these scenes for comedy?
That's the only way I can accept what I'm seeing on the screen. At least it's gotta mostly have been expected that people would find this uncomfortably amusing.
Well, it is interesting as a 1969 cultural moment movie, right? Because 1969 is the sexual revolution has really soured. Everybody knows it's failed. And so this kind of has the feeling, this whole movie has the feeling of a rancid, silly orgy.
And now we have Richard Nixon. All right, let's listen to Leonard Maltin on The House That Screamed. He gives this one 1.5 stars out of a possible 4. Grisly horror at a home for troubled girls, where disciplinarian Palmer and her sex-starved son make life difficult, to say the least, for the young ladies. The director, Narciso Ibanez Serrador. Cast list, Lilli Palmer, Christina Galbo, John Mulder-Brown, Mary Maud, Candida Losada.
Obviously, the reason Lilli Palmer got this role, and she is credited as starring in the movie, was obviously for her role in Mädchen in Uniform, even though this headmistress is the polar opposite of the teacher in that movie, does everything that that teacher doesn't do. But that is a reminder as well. When we did that movie for this series, we talked about, there's another example of a film that is doing what de Sade fails to do, in that it very efficiently shows how a particular restrictive and sadistic culture can create sexual sadomasochism in the people living under it.
The school in question in the film is located in France, but this movie was made in Spain, and it seems to have much more to do with fascist Spain than with France. Maybe they had to do it this way to get it past Franco's censors, I don't know.
So you think this movie is referring to Mädchen in Uniform in that way as well? That it is some kind of commentary on the fascist regime?
Of course it must be. I mean, it's made in a fascist country.
I didn't think of this movie as having even one single idea.
I didn't love this movie, but I did find it fairly interesting, at least right up until the end.
Oh, speaking of silly,
yeah,
that was one of the silliest endings to a movie I have ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, that took me by surprise and really knocked it down several pegs. But certainly it is examining the host of mental and spiritual ailments that can begin to afflict people who are living under an iron-handed regime.
Okay, I found this, in those terms, not even remotely as interesting as Mädchen in Uniform.
Well, of course it's not as interesting as Mädchen in Uniform.
But make your case.
It's just very interesting the way the movie, it does have several misdirects in it. You know something terrible is going on, and for a while you're not sure it's going to rise to the level of murder, although you kind of expect it to with a title like that. And then it does. And then it does keep you guessing for a while about exactly who is doing this killing and for what reason.
Oh yeah, it reminded me of that werewolf movie that we recently saw.
She-Wolf of London?
Yeah, the She-Wolf of London. In that regard, it's basically the last third of the movie is just guessing who the murderer is.
I suppose so, but this one is more interesting than that.
I don't know about. I liked She-Wolf of London better, but make your case.
Well, that one just winds up being exactly what you'd expect, which is that Sarah Hayden really is doing all the vicious things. In this one, Lilli Palmer, she has her ideas about how to run a school and how to deal with these girls, and she has set things into motion, and she's created psychopaths all over the place, including her son and several of her lieutenants, right? These people willingly or eagerly go along with beating their fellow students when she gives the word.
Well, they seem to have, her chief lieutenant seems to have just gone off on her own and is like a worse sadist than Lilli Palmer at this point.
Yeah, but she's clearly learned at Lily's hands.
Well, that's what the Marquis de Sade says.
Yeah. And what I loved about the movie, where I thought it was going, was, okay, we've been following Therese, or Teresa, or whatever her name is, the new arrival, who's like the Olivia at the school. We think it's going to be her story, and it is, to some degree, until all of a sudden she gets killed when trying to leave.
Yeah, obviously, at the point at which she tries to escape after she is subjected to this bullying ritual, that was a scene that I thought was a reference to Victor Fleming's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, when Spencer Tracy forces Ingrid Bergman to sing and smile.
Yeah.
Now, of course, it's much better executed in the Fleming movie.
Yeah, but that was pretty disturbing, that scene. This can't be a movie that is well-liked in the LGBTQ community, because
lot of evil lesbians
immediately equated the two things. If you desire women, you are evil in this movie.
Yeah, and there's no attempt to explore role repression might play in that. But it is interesting that we think we're going to get a lesbian seduction scene, and no, her only sexual satisfaction now is bullying these girls that she desires.
But the thing is that girl, Irene Tupin, she seems like she's going to be the final girl at the end. And I was like, okay, all of a sudden this is starting to seem really cool. So she's not been involved in the killing, she's been involved in this bullying, but then it's going to be like, what, bully against bully?
So we agree on that much. The movie I found ridiculous and boring up until after that scene when Teresa tries to escape and is aided by Lilli Palmer's son, Louis. I then immediately wondered, because we've got this killer on the loose, we think that it is this gardener because he looks the type, trope misdirection. So I start wondering, is she going to be the final girl? Is this the final girl? Nope, because she gets murdered.
Yeah, it turns out Lilli Palmer is the final girl in a way, right?
Yeah, and then the next question is, then it becomes interesting after our protagonist is dead, because the protagonist role switches, which is not usual in a movie. Now the villains become our protagonists.
Exactly.
The next person we suspect of being the killer is Lilli Palmer, and she is also suspected by Tupin. I can't remember exactly when we know that it's definitely not Lilli Palmer.
It becomes clear in that scene because she's looking around for Tupin. They've got that misdirect where she's got the letter opener.
Yeah, but everybody watching that moment knows it's a misdirect. That's it's a misdirect that's admitting it's a misdirect.
When she finds the dead Tupin, and obviously she's surprised, so she didn't do it, unless she's got a split personality.
Right, but as you were saying, even in that scene, she changes her performance, right? And when she's looking around for her in confusion, then you know this is obviously not the killer.
Right.
And then she goes into the attic. Now she is the horror protagonist exploring in the attic, where bad things are going to happen, surely. And then I started getting excited, because we just saw Lilli Palmer in the other movie facing off against the Marquis de Sade and dominating him, although she herself is also destroyed. Is this villain going to turn out to be such a hard-ass badass that she's going to take on? And we're still wondering, it could be something supernatural, because there have been hints of that, and we've got that hint again with the rocking horse. Is this just going to be the freaking devil? Is Lilli Palmer's evil fascist headmistress going to go toe-to-toe with the devil himself? But no.
And show him the iron hand.
No, there's something much more ridiculous that's about to happen.
Yeah.
And actually, speaking of, I can only understand this as the director trying for comedy. As soon as the boy says, "I've made a woman just like you, mother," that was seems like that's a joke. Like, that has to be a joke that's supposed to get a laugh.
Well, I hope so, but it was still too stupid. I mean, he leads her over to his Frankenstein operating table where he has put together like a jigsaw puzzle, several parts of the 5 girls who've tried to escape and all been murdered. The hand was the last thing because Tupin had a hand just like Lilli Palmer's, and he pulls back the sheet and reveals his handiwork, and Lilli Palmer just screams and he locks her in there.
So Michael Powell's Peeping Tom really did a disservice, and Psycho, of course.
Yeah.
To Peeping Toms, because now they're linked in every movie. Like, if you've got a Peeping Tom, you better know that he's going to be the psychotic killer.
Yeah, well, I mean, I began to suspect, obviously there's something wrong with this boy from the beginning, but when he talks to Teresa and tells her that she's the only person he's ever been close to or whatever, we just saw that he had a similar, or seemed to be a similar closeness with Isabel.
She's the only friend he's ever had, and they don't seem to have anything romantic happening, so I thought that's what he was referring to.
Yeah, maybe, but he just seems to have completely forgotten about Isabel, and rightly so, because he has killed her and taken her body parts for his project.
I did wonder, like, the sexual psychology is just all over the place here. So I don't understand. I guess Lilli Palmer is an evil bisexual, because why is she sexually obsessed with these girls, particularly the one girl she likes to beat, and also sexually obsessed with her son?
Well, I'm not sure of that.
She's just an all-purpose pervert.
She seems to be. She's got some real problems.
Okay, but Palmer's performance, though, until the movie performs those sort of interesting variations on horror movie structure, the only thing making the movie watchable is Lilli Palmer's performance. The moments when she goes for comedy. Like, particularly every time she has to dictate to the girls for them to, I don't know what they're doing. They're
taking notes?
Are they taking notes? Is this a composition class? Is this about penmanship? Is this about spelling? I don't know what's going on here. But she's dictating to the girls to take things down, and she has to repeat all of these lines about the greatness of Western literature. She has to repeat every ridiculous line twice. And she just absolutely savors the comedy of that, right?
Oh, I agree. I mean, that's the first scene of the movie.
And it repeats later on as well.
Although the variation there is that she's been unnerved and unsettled by recent events, and she can't even do that, which she clearly has been doing for 20 or 30 years. She stumbles in her recitations in that second version of the scene.
Yeah, and throughout the movie she takes every opportunity to deliver a line in an unusual way that adds some comedy to the proceedings without ever being camp. Because that would be the obvious way to play this, right?
No, she doesn't, and it is really chilling, and you know what? The most disturbing thing about the movie by the end, because it does start to direct you toward the thought that she must be responsible for the killings because they've had 5 girls escape and she's made no inquiries.
Right.
That's why Irene thinks she must be doing it, or at least hiring someone to do it, or having someone do it.
She's just protecting her school.
No, even more than that, she just doesn't give a fuck. She's like, okay, they're gone, whatever. I don't care what happened to them. That's actually more chilling to me, in fact, than her being a maniacal killer, right? I mean, this is someone who, they get off the grounds and we wash our hands of them. When she says that to Irene, it sounds like she's just trying to think of something that might sound semi-plausible, but it's the truth. It's like, I don't care anymore. Maybe they got home, maybe whatever. She's actually not worried and doesn't have any feelings for these girls. She thinks that they're trash and horrible, and she says that over and over again to her son, to the point where he has internalized the idea that, sure, I could use them as raw materials to build my own girl. They have no souls anyway. It's really crazy. And that part of it I found unsettling in a good way. The ending, the reversal on her, I mean, it could have been revealed to be the son in a way that I would have found chilling, I think, and would have actually upset me as much as it upsets her. But the way they did it, I mean, that is ludicrous camp and kind of was a real demerit to the film.
No, I don't know. I don't think there was any way to not make that ridiculous, that he's building a Frankenstein monster.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It shouldn't have been been that at all. I mean, he should have just been a maniac killer, not assembling a body. If they wanted it to be him, it could have just been him saying, well, you told me these were bad girls. These were not real human beings. So what does it matter what I did with them?
Well, obviously they want the psycho reversal. This is what the director's going for.
I know. But yeah, I hated it.
And of course, the thing about Psycho is that Hitchcock gradually introduces this idea in the movie. I don't know. No, he doesn't really gradually introduce it.
No, I don't like the ending of Psycho either.
No, that's wrong. That's just wrong. Because Vera Miles' descent into that cellar and slow wheeling around of Mrs. Bates and that image and swinging light, no, those are all great. And then Perkins coming in with the maniacal expression and the knife in the silly wig and the outfit is the perfect black comedy note. That scene is inarguably perfect. And it's so horrifying that it can sustain the ridiculousness that's intentionally there. But it helps that no one is saying a speech. You know, that might have... No, nothing can save the ending of this movie, but if we had just been allowed to understand what he was doing without him doing a whole speech about it, it might have helped.
Maybe. I don't think so. But obviously this is Lilli Palmer hoist by her own petard, by her own insane actions as a parent and as a headmistress. Everything's coming home to roost, and now she's locked in the attic with a multi-corpse, possibly forever, because her son seems to understand that he can't let her leave that room. I mean, his characterization doesn't really hang together all that well.
Not at all. I mean, that could be another reason why Psycho works, that you have actually gotten to know this psycho and understood him as a person, but can also fully believe him as the murderer.
Yeah, I mean, we don't get to spend enough time with little Louis, and he just seems...
And of course, he's this little golden-haired boy who looks like he could be advertising butter biscuits or something. And he's making this speech to her at the end.
He does close that ant up in his book, a rather sadistic act.
That's true. That should have been... That's all the foreshadowing we needed, really.
So he breaks his piggy bank, gives all his money away to Teresa, and then goes and kills her. I'm not sure he needed to do that.
Well, he must have a split personality.
I mean, he did that just to fool us, it seems like. She was leaving anyway. But yeah, just for those moments where Irene is outside and begins to suspect that even worse things are going on at the school than the stuff that she's been doing.
I have a line, she said, or something like that.
I was like, oh, all of a sudden I'm really liking this movie. And that feeling stayed with me until all of a sudden she got killed. And it gradually sank back to the point where that ending really fucked things up.
So I think we can say that we were trying to make a case, although based on a series with many holes in it because there are many, many Lilli Palmer movies we haven't been able to see, but we were trying to make a case last time for her as an actor based on how she selects her films, and I think that case has now been destroyed, and we have to admit that, and she just wants to work.
I never want to see these movies again. But I'm still happy that we're going through Lilli Palmer's filmography, and I've got high hopes for the next one, because that includes Lotte in Weimar.
Yes, that may be good.
All right, well, time for some Fear and Moviegoing in Toronto. We will be discussing Fast Times at Ridgemont High in full when we get to our Jennifer Jason Leigh Acteurist Spotlight, which is only a year or two away. But I think we need to make some comments on our first post-COVID trip to the Carlton Cinema for $5 screening. Fast Times at Ridgemont High by Amy Heckerling.
You're a fan of this movie.
Yes, but this is the first time I ever saw it on the big screen because I was only 8 when it came out and I would not have been able to go to the cinema at that time to see this one. I definitely saw it on VHS in the 80s. Maybe the first time I ever saw Jennifer Jason Leigh, and I always loved her in this movie. I became like a super fan of Jennifer Jason Leigh when I saw Mrs. Parker and Georgia. That's the mid-90s.
So this is a teensploitation movie. There's a lot of breasts.
There are, for sure.
There's a lot of sex. It's all about sex.
But it's written from a female perspective for the most part, and you've got Amy Heckerling directing it, and it does feel very different from, like, Porky's, let's say.
Sure. It's got one of the most absolutely basic scripts I have ever...
Well, written by Cameron Crowe.
...ever been subjected to. So I guess he was doing that on purpose. It's absolutely basic dialogue.
Well, he was a Rolling Stone reporter, and he went back and posed as a high school student for a year and wrote this script. The rest is history for Cameron Crowe.
I feel like the high school students that I knew were more intelligent than the ones that he was hanging out with.
Could be. You got a broad sampling of different types in this movie. It's an ensemble cast.
Every teen movie has to have a sampling of types.
I like this so much more than something like The Breakfast Club, let's say.
Why?
You like The Breakfast Club?
I haven't seen it in many years, but why?
I love Jennifer Jason Leigh in this movie. She's to me, seems like a very believable, horny teenager who...
Is she horny? Or
Yes.
Is she horny, or is she, I guess so. Or is she just having sex in order to have sex?
No, I think she wants to explore this. Yeah, I mean, she's horny. She wants to know what it's all about. I mean, that's really interesting. You don't get a lot of movies from a woman's perspective or a teenage girl's perspective about this. Certainly not in the 80s, you didn't. And I found that really interesting. And yeah, she has some pretty unsatisfying experiences. The movie's very upfront about how miserable that first sexual encounter is.
Well, the second one is worse.
Yeah, I mean, they're just terrible. But, well, that first one, like, where, you know, it's this 26-year-old guy, they're on a bench, but it doesn't go to the other extreme, right? It's just like run-of-the-mill, horrible teenage girl experience with sex. It's not like a vicious rape or anything, but he obviously doesn't care what she's getting out of it, and she doesn't know what's going on, and she's reading graffiti off of the top of the dugout, the baseball dugout that they're in.
Well, I mean, obviously her trajectory is from being a human being with absolutely no sense of self-worth and a stunning naivety that ends up getting her pregnant. And unfortunately, this absolutely nihilistic portrayal of teenage life in America is probably related to the state of the United States today. I'm not saying that teen sex is good anywhere in the world. It probably isn't. We haven't really solved the problem of sex anywhere, have we? But this is nihilistic. This is horrifying. This is life. And I'm sure it is accurate, because why are all these girls getting pregnant anyway? Because they're having valueless, meaningless, horrible sex for no discernible reason, and nobody can figure out how to use birth control or understands how any of this works. And her trajectory is from being that, a person with absolutely no sense of self-worth, to dating the nice boy.
Yeah, the Woody Allen stand-in. I love the relationship between Jennifer Jason Leigh and Judge Reinhold as her brother, who initially it teases you with the idea that these are going to be antagonistic siblings, like a tiny bit, but ultimately they're very loving and supportive of one another, and he really comes through for her when she needs to get the abortion, and it's very heartfelt, that stuff, I find.
I mean, yeah, obviously it's her trajectory in that whole abortion storyline and the no big deal handling of it and the supportiveness of her friend and her brother and the boy who ends up being her boyfriend, although he also does not break off relations with all of that is interestingly handled. When I say it's a very basic script, I'm only talking about the dialogue.
Yeah, because Ron Romanis, he's not depicted as a pure villain,
No.
even though he bails on Jennifer Jason Leigh. He does, like, terrible things, but it shows him as an insecure teen who's fucked up and doesn't know what to do. He actually can't get a hold of the money that he said he would give her to pay for half of the abortion, so he doesn't show up. Just makes everything a million times worse. But he's not a cartoon teen movie villain either. Nobody is.
These people are just so extraordinarily, believably, emotionally stunted.
Yeah, that's why it's so good.
They have no thoughts. They have no values. They have no ideas. They barely have emotions.
And Sean Penn is hilarious.
Oh yeah, there's two great comedy set pieces, right? There's Sean Penn and his friend wrecking the friend's brother's car, who keeps talking about how his brother's gonna shit. And the way that they cleverly get out of this problem of the brother killing them.
Yeah, it becomes an inspirational moment in the history of Ridgemont High football.
So that scene between them is absolutely hilarious. And Judge Reinhold's apprehension of the convenience store robber.
It's so good.
Also involving Sean Penn.
Yeah, I mean, he's a very big part of it. And the first person to cheer for Judge Reinhold. But just the stuff with Spicoli and Mr. Hand, I think, is really fun, too.
In terms of depictions of teen sexual life, I would put this up there in bleakness with Fire Walk With Me. Although it comes to a better resolution.
Without the Spicoli, Mr. Hand history class interactions, I don't think that you get Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure either.
Which is a very funny movie.
Yeah, so time travel fans can thank this movie for that. I guess we should stop now because we'll give it the full treatment through the lens of Jennifer Jason Leigh when we do our spotlight. And that means all that there's left for us to do is let you know that next week on the podcast, it's our special subject. The second part of our focus on actress Anna Magnani. We'll be discussing 4 films: The Rose Tattoo, Wild is the Wind, The Fugitive Kind, and Mama Roma. So a mix of Italian and American cinema there, and I'm looking forward to it. We had a good time, very interesting time with our first 4 Magnani films. And this is your pick, so I can only imagine you're excited about this one as well.
That's correct, Dave.
See you soon.